Good morning, you guys. Can everybody come downstairs that take their seats? Mayors, can you come to the front? Quickly. Mary, can we get you downstairs quickly? Stage right, Mary. Supposed to. Sit right there. Yeah, you're fine. Mary, can we get you downstairs quickly? Sit right there, one second. Carla. He's on panel too. Yeah. When he comes on stage, he's going to hold the whole time. Is that dressed? Yeah, but like before that, you can sit right here in the corner closest to the exit. Okay. Thank you so much. Good morning. We're getting ready for the live stream feed. Is live stream ready to go? All right, let's get started. Good morning. I'm Phyllis Dickerson, the CEO of the African American Mayors Association. Welcome to the great campus of Morehouse College. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. First, I'd like to call to the stage the former mayor of Denver, Colorado, who had this vision from the beginning, former Mayor Michael Hancock.
Good morning, everyone. We have people still coming in, but we're going to go ahead and get started with this party. You know, in 1857, in a speech, Frederick Douglass said, "Power concedes nothing without demand. It never did, and it never will." Disturbingly, the Brennan Center reported recently that immediately following the 2020 presidential election, 19 states passed 34 laws restricting access to voting. Even more alarming, over 440 bills with provisions that restrict voting access were introduced in 49 states in the 2021 legislative session alone, marking a significant and rapid increase in voter restrictions. In 2022, we witnessed efforts to restrict voting and gerrymandering of voting maps become more brazen as legislators introduce bills to allow partisan actors to interfere with election processes and even rejecting election results entirely. So this morning, we welcome you to this town hall meeting. As Phyllis pointed out, I'm the former mayor of Denver and founder of the National Nonpartisan Conversation on Voter Rights. I want to thank Phyllis Dickerson and my friends, Mayor Sean Patterson, immediate past president of AMA, and our new president of this great association, of course, the Honorable Stephen Reed, the mayor of Montgomery, Alabama. Give them a round of applause. We want to thank Morehouse College, of course. We're glad to be here for hosting us today. I want to thank my team of the National Nonpartisan Conversation on Voter Rights, Alina Dunham, Shamitre and Franchell from Classique, Alton Dillard of the Dillard Group, and George Hill of GovConnect. There's going to be a great panel today. We also want to thank our sponsor, Win Collective, for voter rights. Because I want you to think about this for a moment. Imagine you are a 75-year-old named Miss Lee. Let's give you a name. In Houston, Texas. You received your ballot in the mail. The only challenge you have now with your limited mobility is where to drop off your ballot. After the 2020 election, the state of Texas restricted the number of ballot drop-off locations, and it went from 24 throughout the large city of Houston, Texas, to just one. Now, to drop off your ballot, Ms. Lee, you must find a way to travel some 10 miles across the city of Houston to exercise your inalienable right to vote. In 1965, hundreds of marchers set off from the Brown Chapel in Selma to begin the 54-mile trek to Montgomery to demonstrate their support for the voter rights bill that was pending at that time in the U.S. Senate. I know we know the rest of the story as they crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge and were met violently by the Alabama State Patrol. Dozens of marchers were injured and 4 died following the attack. Now, while we remember the horrific scenes of the attacks on the marchers that day, we must not forget what inspired the march in the first place. Jimmy Lee Jackson, a church deacon from Marion, Alabama, unarmed, participating peacefully in a voter rights march just days before, was brutally beaten and shot by the Alabama State Patrol. He would die 8 days later. This incident, in addition to the pending bill in the Senate, sparked a march that day, which became the flashpoint for the Voter Rights Act. Now, the affront to voter rights we have witnessed across the nation should be a loud clarion call to every American, particularly African Americans whose ancestors fought, bled, and died for this right. As I close, I want to inject this thought. Yesterday, during his inspiring inaugural speech, after accepting the gavel as the new president of the association, AMA, Montgomery Mayor Steve Reed asked the question, and I'm paraphrasing, who are we? Who are we to be the beneficiaries of courageous acts of our ancestors, to sit in our comforts of today and not activate to protect the hard-earned rights they sacrificed to give us? Rights that many of them didn't get to enjoy. So we are here today for a conversation about voter rights. The election in November is critical. I am scared and afraid that we won't exercise our rights. I'm terrified that the next president will be elected by people who didn't show up. So in the words of Steve Reed, who are we to sit home because we don't have the perfect choice? Who are we to sit idly by? To sit idly by while the efforts to suppress the vote are taking place across this nation. We are here to remind each other why and how we must exercise our right to vote and our obligation to honor those who came before us. In September, as I leave, we are planning a Just Vote rally at the base of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. I want you all to think about, when you see it, joining us. So 8-hour celebration to encourage people to vote and to remind everyone to vote. We also want to encourage you to download the playbook as elected officials and community activists on how we can work within these new suppressive laws and environment to make sure that our citizens are voting. You can find that at the nncvr.com website. The playbook was written by our partners at the National League of Cities, and we thank you. Let's have a great conversation, and thank you for being here.
Next, we'll have remarks from Mayor Stephen Reed, Mayor of Montgomery, Alabama, and the newly elected president of the African American Mayors Association.
Thank you, Phyllis. Good morning. It's good to have so many of you here with us in person, and for those who are watching us online, thank you for joining us virtually as well. As a House man, class of 1996, it gives me great honor to welcome you to Martin Luther King Jr. Chapel. This chapel is not only important to Morehouse College, it is important to the city, the state, the nation, and the world. And for that, Dean Carter, I want to thank you for your leadership of this chapel and maintaining it and making sure that those who are a part of this history live up to the standards that have been set. So thank you so much for your leadership over the years and your dedication to Morehouse and beyond. To our president, David Thomas, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for taking this college to unprecedented heights. We know it's a challenging environment, but we appreciate your vision and your implementation of that. And as CEOs ourselves of cities, I think that we can learn from academia. I think we can learn from leaders like yourself, and we can learn how to better our organizations and our missions and what we do in government, as well as what you do in academia. So we're grateful for your leadership, and we're grateful for your courage, and we stand with you each and every day in leading this college to the type of place that I think Dr. King and so many others who we talk about when you come through these halls really wanted and expected Morehouse to be. So thank you so much as well. I just want to say, as a president of the African American Mayors Association, thank you to all the mayors for being here. It has been a great week of activities, been a great week of sharing knowledge and information, and it has been a great week of socializing, getting to know one another, getting to find out what's happening back at home, both good and bad and indifferent, but also finding out how your families are doing, how you are doing. Making sure you invest in some level of self-care in what you are charged to do back home. And so I think being here today is, again, a great opportunity to have a conversation that we should be a part of, that it's important for us to help lead during this trying time. And I do think relative to other election cycles, this one is unique, this one is challenging, and this one presents a lot of challenges, but it presents a lot of opportunities. And I look forward to the conversation that we'll have with our fellow mayors today, as well as those who are engaged, letting us know what we can do, not only as mayors in our own communities, but what we can do as an association. So I look forward to continue to lead you over the next year, amplifying your voice, amplifying your priorities to the current administration, to our communities at large, as well as making sure that we are taking the best ideas we can back to our cities, back to our states, and making sure that we are part of the progress that we need to see this country continue to make. So thank you so much, and I look forward to the conversation.
And next, Dr. Lawrence Carter, Founding Dean of the MLK Chapel Morehouse College.
Good morning. I'm the founding dean, Lawrence Edward Carter Sr., in my 44th year. And of course, I serve with the pleasure of our 12th president, Dr. David Anthony Thomas, who I believe has made the correct decision and extended an invitation to President Joseph Biden to speak at our commencement. I will simply has positioned the college to be a catalyst in planetary transformation. Let me say a little more about that. Please, right now, you are sitting in a cemetery. Morehouse College's highest point is the highest hill outside of Atlanta. That's significant because that highest point is where the gate was located, through which William Tecumseh Sherman had to march 62,000 troops in order to carry out the order of Ulysses S. Grant to burn Atlanta, which he did 40% of. His success was the first signal to Abraham Lincoln that he would win a second term, that the North would win the war, that the enslaved Africans would be freed, that emancipation would begin, and Reconstruction would be established. That land, which today we call the Century Campus, though we're in our second century, was the campus of Martin Luther King Jr. On that same site, his funeral was held, and our sixth president, Benjamin Elijah Mays, delivered the eulogy. That campus is blood-soaked. It went from civil war to civil rights. Transition. Turn around and look up at the balcony. I want to bring to your attention that there are 50 United Nations flags hanging from the balcony. There are 7 that fly outside when they're up around the Thurman obelisk. And there's one that sits in front of the Wendell Whalum organ on the platform. 58 United Nations flags. I want you to be aware that they have not been there but a few weeks, but for decades. 50 nation-state flags hung from the balcony, because I successfully persuaded the trustees on my arrival to change the name of the chapel from Memorial to International. So the 50 flags certainly don't represent all of the 192 nations of the United Nations. Just a few that represented where our faculty had studied abroad, students were from, and some of our most distinguished honorees were from. But twice, a student took down the Israeli flag. The first time it was returned because it was just an act of civil disobedience to get our attention for dialogue. And the students screamed, "They're killing the children, they're killing the children, they're killing the children." But the second time, a few days later when it came down, I knew that it would not go back up and that it had been stolen. I'm telling you this because I called the president and said to him what had happened and what I wanted to do. I told him I wanted to remove all of the nation-state flags because they were now contradicting what we meant when we changed from Memorial to International. I said, the students are getting the wrong message, and I've got to now scream at them. Did you hear that? We've now got to scream at them. All those flags, 58 of the same flag, I'm preaching the loudest sermon I've ever preached without mounting the pulpit. And we're saying, by taking down the Israeli flag, you wanted to checkmate the administration. I said, I'm also the administration. You wanted to move us to taking sides with one nation against another. I said, you don't get it. We are for humanity. We are aware and believe that Jesus was right when he said, he who lives by the sword shall die by it. But the issues can't be reduced to a single issue. They're very complex. And it's going to be important to stay in the room when everything is being discussed so you can help decide. So my brothers and sisters, I welcome you to this house. It is a house for the whole world. We call it the Nonviolent Cosmic World House Dream Center. We must now move from being global citizens to being cosmic citizens, or you will never address the issue of global warming. The World House is in the universe, the cosmos.
So, Dr. Thomas, can you come to the stage and just welcome everyone to your campus, the great Morehouse College, the president of Morehouse.
Well, I think you just got from Dean Carter the best welcome we could give you, which is a description of what animates this college philosophically and from the standpoint of values. So again, welcome to Morehouse College. I will just say that Morehouse College is a place that 5 or so decades ago made mayoral history when Maynard Jackson was elected the first black mayor of a major southern city. And since then, we have offered to the world many young men, alumni of this college who've gone on to lead cities. Stephen Reed is a prime example. Randall Woodfin is another example. And there are several others. Last thing I'll say is your CEO had on her purse a little tag that said Black Mayors Matter, and Black Mayors Matter. We have a paralyzed federal government. We have craziness at the state level, but it's black mayors who actually create the reality that surrounds black citizens every day. So I am grateful for the hard work that all of you do. College professor, college presidents, you're not doing it for the money. Have a great day.
All right, let's get the conversation started. So for panel one, we have moderating former Mayor Karen Freeman Wilson from Gary, Indiana, currently the president and CEO for the Chicago Urban League, Mayor Justin Bibb from Cleveland, Ohio, Mayor Sean Patterson Howard from the great city of Mount Vernon, New York, and Mayor Eric Simmons from the great city of Greenville, Mississippi. I don't know how we ended up with 3 attorneys on one panel, but there you have it. Thank you.
Thank you, Phyllis, and good morning. It is a distinct honor to join AMA in the celebration of its 10th anniversary, and I'm especially pleased to join this group of mayors as we talk about those issues that are really complicated, but so essential to the work that all of you do. I want to thank President Thomas and founding Dean Carter for sort of setting the table for us, and of course, Mayor Reed, our illustrious leader, and Mayor Hancock, our sponsor, and to all of you for being here. But let's get this conversation started. So as you think about the challenges that face you all every day as mayors, and they always talk about the fact that mayors don't have the luxury of saying that I can't make it, because they think that you can probably make it from one side of the city to the other, right? Or that that's not your issue. Even if you're not over education, you're still held responsible for the schools. Even if you're not in charge of wastewater, you're still held responsible for race or waste. So as you think about the challenges around climate change and just the severe weather events and the impact of that, Mayor Patterson Howard, I want to talk about how that's impacting your community in Mount Vernon, and I want you to just talk to us a little bit about the insurance exclusion, because I think we're all seeing it, but would you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely.
It's on.
It was on? Okay. So thank you so much, Mayor, because you're forever a mayor. So, you know, in our communities, we all know that climate change is causing much more severe weather incidents. And so there's flooding, big storms, wind. Even in places like California and other states, we're having fires, wildfires like we've never seen them before. And so insurance on homeownership insurance is going up somewhere between 12 and 18. And so when we talk about housing affordability, and we talk about rising interest on mortgages and loans and things of that nature, we're not talking about the rising cost of insurance. And that there are many states right now where a lot of insurance companies are pulling out. And I wanted to just make sure, because if this is one of your states, we need you to really start looking into this. So Florida, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Texas, Georgia, Nebraska, Massachusetts, New York, Colorado, and Kansas. Those are the 10 states where insurance companies, private insurance companies, are pulling out and saying we don't want to write and underwrite new policies in these states. because of all of the flooding that's happening and the fires and the extreme wind events. And so in Mount Vernon, which is 65% black, it rains and we're dealing with bad sewers and flood issues. I'm out in my car, in my truck with my detail, and we're riding around because I'm finding families literally standing in front of their greatest asset in tears, breaking down because they have 6, 7 feet of water in their basement. And we had one of our incredible pastors, it literally broke the foundation of his house, which cost him $250,000 to repair.
Wow.
Right, $250,000 to repair. And 18 months later, he saw a flood again. And he said, I spent my entire retirement on fixing my house, and I don't have anything left, right? And so this is what we're seeing. So we're talking about black home ownership in so many ways, but we're not looking at these extreme weather events and the impact that the insurance industry is having. And so we know nationally that there is a challenge to the National Flood Insurance Program because many people don't have flood insurance. That's not part of your regular homeowner's insurance.
Right.
And so you have to buy additional flood insurance. And that program is in jeopardy. And so we really, really have to look because we know through redlining that it is the black and brown communities, and what did they say? We live in the low country, right? We have some states we talk about, we live in the low country in many places, and they were flood prone before we ever bought those houses. And now also the other challenge is you have to do a disclosure form. And so when you are selling your house, as of March, I know in New York State, and I'm not sure about all of the states, now you have to disclose to the purchaser if you've had flood problems. And if you've had flood problems, then that is going to impact the selling price of your house. It's going to impact whether or not the person wants to buy it because they're going to have to look at insurance. So we have to look at extreme weather. This is climate change. And when I became mayor, I was like Jay-Z, I got 99 problems, and environmental justice is not one of them. I did, right? We're dealing with housing and crime and mental health and you know, the things that we are usually looking at in many of the urban communities. But environmental justice has become the area that I've had to learn more and stand more than ever before in my mayoralty. And so we have to start turning our attention to this much more because in our cities, people are going to start moving there more because there's more infrastructure. And so we're talking about the migrant crisis with people coming from other places. We're going to deal with climate migration, and it's going to impact our city. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation. Insurance is a very challenging issue, and going up between 12 and 20% in many of our states is something that we have to look at, and we have to come together to address the National Flood Insurance Program.
You know, you raised something that I'm sure our colleagues on the stage have felt. I mean, you know, when you go into office, you're not really thinking like an environmental justice crusader. I mean, you know, that's something that has typically been
White people hugging trees. That's not what we
but
did.
that's not where we are now. I mean,
with Birkenstocks.
yeah, but
Now we're talking about tree canopy.
sure.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about heat islands. Now we're talking about solar panels and things that we heard people talk about years and years ago, but now we're talking about them because it's impacting our communities at a greater rate than it is any of the other communities. And with rising costs of electricity, when you have no tree canopy and the neighborhood over here is 5 degrees to 7 degrees hotter than it is in a tree-lined community,
Yep.
your utility bills cost more. And if you were struggling to pay for food and struggling to pay rent and mortgage, now you're struggling to pay your utility bills. So we have to look at this issue in a very serious way.
That's absolutely so. Mayor
yes,
Sims,
Mayor-
would you talk about that?
Mayor Patterson Howard and I both were in Dubai. We went to COP 28 in Dubai on this same issue about environmental justice. I am in a city right there on the Mississippi River Basin, Greenville, Mississippi. Much like Mayor Cantrell from New Orleans, Mayor George Flags from Vicksburg. We also have Mayor Melvin Carter, who is a mayor to Tashara Jones from St. Louis. And what we've seen is $246 billion in disaster losses just in the
That's
last 20
incredible.
years.
That's
And
incredible.
experiencing right now the longest drought on the Mississippi River.
Sure.
And so when we talk about that, we talk about the costs to the folks that we represent. We talk about housing costs. But the only way we can really combat this environmental justice crisis right now is deploy nature-based infrastructure. So that's what we're doing, because that's the only thing small cities like Greenville can afford right now. Great infrastructure is costing too much. Concrete is up 30%. Everything is up. And so we're deploying these nature-based infrastructures, working with Ducks Unlimited to do reconnected floodplains, marshes, to kind of absorb the land and absorb water at times of high river, and then when it's low river, it can release it out. And so we've been talking about environmental justice. The fact of the matter is the EPA has these regulations that we have to abide by. The only way we can pay for some of these EPA climate resilient strategies is increased water and sewer rates. And in Greenville, Mississippi, with a 38.6% poverty rate, when we increase a sewer rate by $5,
That's
that lady
prohibitive.
who gets an SSI check of just $7.57 is making determinations. I'm gonna pay my water bill, or I'm going to get my medicine.
Right.
So these historic investments that we're seeing in the Biden-Harris administration are great that we're seeing right now. But give it down to the lowest level. Like we said, Black mayors matter. Don't give it to the state. Because when you give it to the state, they kind of somewhat, especially in a red state like mine,
Especially when you're red.
you hit that brick red wall and it don't get to the blue area of a city like Greenville with 80% black folks who need it.
Yep.
So what we've been doing is working directly with the administration. We just received and announced last week a STAG grant, State Tribal and Assistance Grant. The entire state of South Dakota received $20 million. And the city of Greenville, Mississippi, thanks to our Congressman Benny G. Thompson, we received $13.2 million, the second highest
That's
award
awesome. That is
in that
awesome.
funding bill signed by the president on March 9th to help black and brown communities who have these environmental justice concerns. So thank you so much. It's a great question.
Mayor Beard, I know that Cleveland has been a leader in this space, especially with the mitigation of vacant and abandoned buildings, as well as with green infrastructure. Would you talk a bit about what you all have been doing there?
Well, for folks that don't know, Cleveland has been at the vanguard around climate and justice since the first black mayor elected of a major city, Carl B. Stokes, was elected. And I'm pretty sure when Carl B. Stokes ran for mayor, he didn't think he would be a climate justice mayor. But in 1969, our river burned, the Cuyahoga River burned. And Carl Stokes did a nationwide pollution tour to talk about the importance of clean waterways in cities like Cleveland, Ohio. And that led to the Clean Water Act, which then led to the creation of the EPA under President Nixon. And so I take this role as mayor very seriously in terms of this issue, as well as being the chair of U.S. Climate Mayors for mayors across the country. And as black leaders, I think we must do a better job of connecting the dots for our residents. You talked about the importance of housing and the built environment. In my city, we were devastated after the Great Recession in 2008. You had predatory mortgage-backed bankers selling people hopes and dreams with these low-interest mortgages that skyrocketed, and it wiped out a lot of our housing stock, and particularly the black part of my city on the east side of Cleveland. And now, as we've been rebounding coming out of the pandemic, a majority of our housing stock in the east side, nearly 50%, is owned by out-of-state LLC investors.
Yes.
Many of which now are not only out of state, but I got companies in Belgium buying up properties in Cleveland.
That's it.
And before we passed our Residents First housing legislation, I had no legal authority to hold them accountable in a court of law. So we did three things. One, we now require every out-of-state LLC investor to have a local agent in charge. So if a property is abandoned or not up to code, we can hold you in court, in a criminal court of law. The second thing we did, we now have a point of sale inspection for vacant properties. And I said to myself, because the real estate lobby pushed me on this, if point of sale is good enough for the suburbs of Cleveland, is damn sure good enough for the city of Cleveland.
That's right.
And we shouldn't undermine our standards just because we are in the urban core of our city. And the last thing we did, just like when you park your car in front of a parking hydrant, you get a parking ticket. Now we are levying civil nuisance tickets on derelict properties in our city to have a better floor for our residents. So when we talk about climate change, when we talk about environmental justice, we can't talk about this issue if we don't talk about housing justice as well, because that's a key part of the built environment in our cities.
Absolutely. Now, I thank you for that, and thank you for your leadership with climate mayors. I've just got one correction, and we've had this discussion. In fact, we had it when we first met. You know that Richard Hatcher was the first mayor elected to a major city in Gary. That's a conversation they would always have.
I knew you were going to do that.
So we were talking about housing, and so many people talk about home ownership as one of the major wealth building tools. But a lot of people don't get to that point because we have challenges in our cities with people who are unhoused. I know that Mayor Johnson is working on this in Chicago with a lot of passion. Would you all talk about, and here's the thing that I would say, every city doesn't have a skid row, right? So it's not always visible, but we have people who couch serve, we have people whose housing is insecure. How do you all, one, find out the magnitude of the problem in addition to the annual count that they do, because you may not count everybody. And as you learn about the problem and assess it, what do you do to address it? I'm going to start with you, Mayor Simmons.
You know, we've looked in Greenville, and we term it the least, the lost, and the left out. And we've worked with faith-based institutions. We just created with two, a white faith-based institution and a black faith-based institution to create a space called a sacred space. Because when you talk about homelessness, you cannot talk about that without talking about mental health. And so we are not only bringing our healthcare providers on board to talk about mental health, also A&D and drug use. We have at our city facility out at the airport a facility that is solely dedicated to homeless couples. And at the sacred space is for mental health. We have a men's side that is completely, that's providing about 250 meals to homeless folks in Greenville, Mississippi, but also our returning citizens as well. Mm-hmm. And so what we created back in 2018 in the city of Greenville was the first ever reentry program in the state of Mississippi called Greenville Reentry and Training Program. Great. Because we are firm believers if a person make a mistake, you know, ain't none of us perfect in this room.
That's right.
You know, and you know, they crucified Jesus. You know, they'll crucify anybody else. And so when our returning citizens, brothers and sisters come back, we label them as great versus convict. We label them as great versus returning citizens. We label them as in great brother or sister coming back into the city of Greenville. And so we've hired in the city of Greenville up to 30 brothers and sisters who had a federal charge, brother, or a state charge, and we've banned the box. And so we kind of curb and hit homelessness not only by incarceration, mass incarceration, we hit it by addressing mental health, but we also hit it also by addressing A&D as well.
Sure.
And so with the reentry program, we've done pretty well, and now we want to just create a pipeline by letting our companies and our nonprofits know if the city can do it, you can do it, but we did it first. So not only is the city led, but also we exhibit the courage to say, these folks are safe, it reduces recidivism, but also in looking at the statistics of forward, 60% of voters right now feel mass incarcerations are the reasons why their communities are less safe. black voters think 75% of that. And so we also are rejecting any policy at the local level or state level in the Mississippi Delta region that is increasing mass incarceration because we don't need it. We need folks out and being productive citizens in our community.
Thank you for that. Mayor Patterson Howard?
So as you said, I did a lot of work for HUD. I started out as a social worker. I'm a certified addictions counselor, and I started running the Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS program back in 1994, right? And so doing the homeless street point in time, the counts that you have to do, in my community, we might find 20, right, in a community of 106,000. Mount Vernon's 4 square miles, 26,000 people per square mile, one of the most densely populated communities in the country. But on paper, it says 75,000. And what we're dealing with more than anything else are people who are taking one-family and two-family houses and turning them into SROs. And we find that because, A, we look at the amount of garbage that we're picking up, we look at the water and sewer usage, but also now when there's a fire, the fires in our community are increasing because now you have in a two-family house 28 people, literally on my block. On a Saturday morning, on a rare Saturday morning when I get to sleep late, I got a call, of course it came over my phone, major fire. It was down the street from me. And we had an autistic man, 35 years old, who died in that house that day. As I stood outside and I watched my firefighters fight. And everyone says, well, Mayor, there's a housing affordability issue. But what's happening is we're preying on our own people now in our communities because as mortgages are unattainable, as insurance is increasing, as people are struggling with maintaining and keeping their homes up to code, they're taking in people. Sure. And I saw 6 toddler beds in a basement. Wow. I saw 7 toddler beds on the 3rd floor. There were 4 refrigerators in a 2-family house, full-size refrigerators. One in the living rooms, the dining rooms had been converted into bedrooms. And in the state of New York, and I don't know how it is in your states, you can't inspect houses that are 1, 2, and 3 family houses. The fire department can only inspect them when they're 4 families and over. And so we have so many people who are crowding into housing just because there is a housing affordability issue. We have a school district of 10,000 students, and we said that 900 of them are homeless because they are doubled and tripled up. So they're not living on the street. It's hard to live on the street in New York. It's hard to have a Skid Row in a Chicago or in a New York or places where it's cold because people will freeze and die on the streets, literally. And so they're living in the basements. They're living in the kitchens. I went into a home where we had about 20 young people under the age of 25, and they turned a closet with a Home Depot 5-gallon bucket into a place where they would go and relieve themselves. And this is how a lot of our people are living, and you have to look for them because I promise you, somewhere in your community, you have people who are tripled up. And so we have to look at the couch surfing and we have to look at the hidden homeless because it's an issue, but it also causes fire challenges. And so we've seen a higher number of structure fires in our community than ever before. And what does that do? That puts your fire department at risk also.
Oh, sure it does.
Right, for
Sure
more
it does.
injuries and death. And so there is a homeless issue. We have to find ways to create more affordable housing. I support Mayor Bass's call for more housing vouchers, absolutely, but we still also have to be careful because if you overflood our communities with housing vouchers, the fair market rent will increase. And so in a neighborhood that's the hood, as the MLKs, right? All of a sudden the rent can go from $1,000 to $1,800 a month because now there's more and more vouchers in the neighborhood. So we have to look at how to balance it. There's not one answer. We have to find an air, land, and sea approach to the housing affordability issue in our communities. It is a challenge.
Mayor Bibb, you have done something significant with a 900-unit development. Would you talk about that?
Yeah, we certainly are seeing this issue in Cleveland, and we recognize, as most mayors in this room also recognize that we as mayors have to increase the entire housing mix that we see in our respective cities. And I want to just touch on the homelessness issue for a second. What we've seen coming out of the pandemic are a couple of things. One, we've seen an increase in issues around mental health and isolation and depression. Secondly, during the pandemic, we got an influx of money to get people off the streets. Now that money is gone, so they're back on the street. And third, we have a high interest rate environment, which has increased the cost of housing across the country. So in Cleveland, right now in our city, we roughly have 300 people that are chronically unhoused. And I was getting calls from clergy, the business community saying, Mayor, what are you doing about homelessness? And often in these conversations, we don't talk about the city-county partnership because as mayor, I don't have a social service budget.
Right.
A majority of my budget is police, fire, EMS, and picking up the trash.
That's it.
And so I had to think outside the box because I couldn't pass the buck to the county. I couldn't pass the buck to the state. Couldn't pass the buck to the federal government. So I found $2 million somewhere, and we created a brand new request for proposals 2 months ago. It's a brand new initiative modeled after the work that Mayor Sylvester Turner did in Houston. As Mayor Reed said, stealing good ideas and try to make them better. And it's called A Home for Every Neighbor. And our goal right now over the next 18 months is to house up to 150 people, with housing first being the solution. Because what I discovered in many of the programs we have in Cleveland and in our county, you have to prove you've been homeless for 6 months. That makes no sense.
Right.
Makes no sense.
Yeah.
And so we as mayors have to design those local solutions that fit our unique needs.
And let me just add too, in Greenville, we gave a city park mayors, and so Congressman Thompson, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee all came to see in Greenville this city park that we gave and built 42 low to moderate income housing units. And we kept in mind that decent and affordable housing shouldn't be judged by your income or the color of your skin either. When I tell you we have climate resilient canopy around it, they have a walking trail around the reserves at Ed Gray in Greenville, but they have slated floors, granite countertops. So when these brothers and sisters walk in here, they live in large, high and large, but they deserve it because it's a human dignity issue when it comes to low to moderate income folks and living in good and decent and affordable housing. But it's a really good project. Donate a city park. Like the mayor said, we don't have those budgets, but if you have a park that you're not using at full capacity and you can clear it out, we had 7 funding sources to get it done, but we built these and got these done 3 years ago.
And we're disproportionately represented in the homeless population.
Sure we
But
are.
also now one of the fastest growing segments of those people becoming homeless are individuals over the age of 60, right? Individuals over the age of 60, and it's usually because they're dealing with a medical issue where they have to stop working and they don't have the income, and these are people who had apartments. And so I think, Victoria, when we went to LA to visit with Mayor Bass, we went in and they told us these were white women who had been gainfully employed, who had become ill, and now were moved from, had to go live in their cars, and then they were living on the streets. And so we have to remember those, and I'm 55, getting ready to be 56. I'm saying it could happen. As you get older, you're dealing with more health issues, and your income can be destabilized. And so we have to look at the entire spectrum, from our children to those who are growing in age and becoming our elders. It's an issue.
You're absolutely right. I'm reminded of, I was in and out of our local hospital almost a year ago. And the first time I saw a woman that I'd gone to high school with, and I was like, hey, how you doing? And we talked about an upcoming reunion. And then about 2 days later, I saw her and she was sitting in the same place. And so the third day I said, so where are you living now? And that's when she went on to share. And I made, some calls to see how I might be helpful, but I was stunned. This is someone I'd gone to school with, had been friends with, had seen her throughout the community. And she talked about having moved away and that not working out and moving back. And so, I think we sometimes stereotype homeless folks. And then if you're not really, because if I hadn't have stopped the third day and paid attention, she would have never said anything. And so you're right. It is becoming a lot more commonplace as people get older and their income gets a little shaky. And, they talk about folks being one paycheck away. I want to talk about something that I'm sure all of you hear about all the time, and that's public safety, community safety. I call it community restoration. And of course, one of the talking points of very conservative folks, I'm not going to even talk about a party, is that urban communities or certain communities with high poverty rates or where a high racial composition are running rampant with crime. We all know that's not necessarily so. We know that there are challenges, but we also know that there are innovative solutions. Mayor Patterson Howard, we both come from the drug court movement, so we understand looking at root causes. Would you all talk about what you're doing in your cities to address community restoration?
So it's really interesting. You never know how different parts of your career and your life will come to play when you sit in the mayoralty. And as you said, I started running drug courts back in the middle of 1990s. And then as CEO of the YMCA, we took over and we became one of the first community violence intervention programs in the state of New York. And so I ran a CVI program through the YMCA for 12 years. And what is that? That is when you are hiring individuals who have been justice involved to become, and training them and allowing them to become credible messengers. And so you are targeting and reaching out to those individuals who are most likely to shoot someone or to be shot. And you're very intentional in that. And so you're creating an ecosystem. When we dealt with COVID, we didn't just deal with it through a medical model. We brought in education, we brought in healthcare, we brought in, faith-based organizations, and it's the same thing in creating that ecosystem of safety because you're dealing with the root issues. And so the credible messengers are reaching out to the individuals who are justice involved, who are on the block, and they're talking to them about education, workforce development, housing, mental health. You have a lot of people out there who have mental health and education challenges, and so they feel they don't have hope. And when a person doesn't have hope and they don't feel as if anyone is seeing them, then the only thing that they feel that they have left is to be that dude. I'm getting my street credibility up, I'm gonna do what I have to do, and I'm gonna handle my business because no one else understands. And so through community violence intervention programs, through workforce development programs, through looking at housing, through working with our churches and finding mentorship for these young men and women, and some of them not always so young, right? And finding that support, we went for 11 and a half months without a homicide in my community. I don't know if that's happened before, 11 and a half months.
That's significant.
And then when someone did come, and we did see a homicide about a month ago, it was somebody who came from out the city to rob a warehouse. I wanted to...
You wanted to do something about that.
But the community piece is work. But the other piece that we're doing is because we know there's a social and emotional component also. And so we started working with our Department of Recreation and our Youth Bureau and making sure, and to the anger of the police, because I'm about 30% short of my police department right now. And so I said, well, we have to have more events and more community outreach events and more festivals. And the police was saying, we don't have the police. We don't have the police to do it. So we're using our CVI workers. We've increased our auxiliary police. We are bringing in peace officers because it's not always a police response. There's prevention, intervention, diversion, enforcement, and restorative practices. And so we have a youth court. We have a youth cannabis court because cannabis is legal in New York now. We have a young adult emerging justice court for those 18 to 24. We have our reentry programs for those restorative practices. And if you understand that the public safety continuum are those 5 pillars, and you invest equally in those 5 pillars, then the enforcement piece is not the prevailing piece. The police department, they're always going to get their money, and that's going to always be a big part of your budget. But we have to make sure that through youth and recreation and mental health and education and workforce development and housing, that we're approaching it holistically, because people want options. And when the school systems have failed them and they graduate and they're out in the community, we have to find other ways to re-engage them in positive ways. And so if you're not familiar with Cities United, connect with Anthony Smith out of Louisville, Kentucky.
Absolutely.
Really, really good work that they're doing. We've become a Cities United community. We're working on our public safety plan and strategies, but it's about partnership, because it cannot just be the government. We are opening up our Office of Violence Prevention, and we're not calling it violence prevention because it can't just be about violence prevention, but we're calling it the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, right? Because we want them to say a safe neighborhood is not just one that's not violent. It's so much more than that. And so we have to change our language, and we have to find partners and be really intentional about our strategies.
You also have to meet them where they are.
Yeah.
I'm that type of mayor in Greenville where, the boys be on the corner, and I drive up in town, they see me get out of the car, oh, there's Mayor Summer. I said, get yourself off this doggone corner. Miss Curry done called me and told me y'all keeping up some racket over here, but also dominoes and spades and getting in there, talking with them. And so we have community events where we are able to listen to the brothers. And when you hear, for the most part, they just have that basic need to belong and love. They're missing that. And some of them are out there on the streets really providing for their brother and sister in the house because mama is working, there's no daddy there. And so we have to create those opportunities, not only for outreach, but opportunities for them to let go. And so we've done a number of those projects. We have a P2P, Pathways to Possibilities, where we get justice-involved youth in the convention center with all of our companies, and they can see these various pathways, whether it's astronomy, whether it's aviation. But then what gets their mind is on the board is the type of money they can make. So it has the technician.
That's right.
And it has the amount of money. So I say, look, man, this clean money. So I walk
That's
with them.
it.
I said, look, this good money right here.
That's
now,
it.
I mean, this good money. And they go around and they have interactive activities with these justice-involved youth. The corporations are doing it. These company representatives are doing that. We do that. We also have the reentry program that I mentioned as well, but also drug court, adult drug court, and youth drug court as well that kind of address a lot of it, because even though Mississippi has medical marijuana right now, folks in my community still think it's recreation. I'm just keeping it real.
Yeah.
And so you walk and you gonna smell it. I said, man, you ain't got no disease to hell no matter marijuana like this. And then the young boys they always got to come back. But Mayor, this the earth. I can go to jail with the earth. I said, boy, put that weed up. But the reality is just reaching them where they are and telling them what rules that govern them, and they really get it. If you talk to them and reach them at their level, they get it.
And you raise an important point with the economics of it. I always tell people that drug dealing is not a financial plan unless you're El Chapo. I mean, the reality is you might make some money for some 270s. You're not going to make it for no Gucci loafers. Now that's real. So when you show them that board, that makes a big difference. Mayor Bill, what are you doing in Cleveland?
Well, I want to just build on what my colleagues just talked about. When I was running for mayor in 2021, one of my competitors said something that really resonated with me. He said, nothing stops a bullet like a job.
Yep.
And
Mayor Johnson says that too.
I think we all recognize, as black mayors especially, that we can't police our way out of this challenge and problem. And so one of the things we've done in Cleveland Because of our great president, President Joe Biden, we had $512 million from the American Rescue Plan. So over $500 million. And one of the things I did was I parked $10 million of ARPA funds because as a city, like I mentioned around social services, I don't have a dedicated revenue source in Cleveland around violence prevention to invest in those root cause solutions. And so we put $10 million of capital at the Cleveland Foundation, the world's first and one of the largest community foundations in the country. And we created the first ever neighborhood safety endowment fund, right? So it's gonna give us, over the next 20 years, an additional $10 to $15 million, so roughly $25 million over 20 years to invest in the proven strategies, interventions that we know can reduce violent crime. And let me tell you why I did this. I grew up at the height of the crack epidemic in my city in the 1990s. And I remember my late grandma, Grandma Sarah is what we called her. She was like the chief of police on my block. All the dope boys knew Grandma Sarah. And one of the most important things she did to keep my block safe was she sold pound cake at the church. And every year, she invested in a community garden and a summer block party. And she was president of the Neighborhood Watch Club. That kept our block safe for a long time.
Sure did.
And our residents know how to keep their blocks safe. We just need to invest in them and get out the way. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do with this Neighborhood Safety Endowment Fund.
That's it. So you guys have really laid out some key jewels about community safety. And so I hope that a number of us are thinking about CVI, thinking about prevention, and you know, you're gonna invest in law enforcement. It's gonna be in your budget. There's no way around that. But there has to be something to keep folks from getting to law enforcement in the first place. I have the sign, so we've got about 3 minutes. I need a minute from each of you about education in your community because it's so key to all of the work that you do.
Well, you know, first generation college students going to college is very daunting. So what we created in Greenville, which is the first formalized college access program in Mississippi, is because our post-secondary numbers are not only the lowest in Mississippi, but lowest in the country. And we were seeing that you had college folks, high school folks making 21, 22 on the ACT, but not going to college because they were intimidated in filling the FAFSA form out. So we created Greenville College Access and Attainment Network, where we now have retired teachers, college professors, everyone helping folks in the community fill FAFSA forms out. I'm a college-educated lawyer, and I still have my accountant to do my FAFSA for Lee Eric at Jackson State.
Oh, no,
it's very, very intimidating.
No, it is.
And so what we've seen is an uptick now of folks going to college. We've created a going to college culture with this particular program, but it's Greenville College Access and Attainment. And so now we have those returning and retired teachers following these students as they go to college, calling them, baby, how you doing? Did you enroll in your classes, your junior year? And now we have a summer program to prevent that brain drain, to get these juniors and seniors to work at businesses in Greenville so they can come back to the Mississippi Delta versus going to Cleveland or Mount Vernon or Chicago. And so that's the program that we have.
They coming to Cleveland.
I know, but that's the program we've created around college access and attainment. Yes.
I love it.
So definitely doing a lot on that college education and attainment, but one of the things that we also needed to do is we got to get our kids to high school.
Sure.
And so we're doing more with our parents because we find that after 6th grade, a lot of the parents are tapping out and not being involved. And having run the Y, the parents would say, I don't want the kids playing basketball. I don't want them going swimming. Make sure their homework is done. And so when you understand how insufficient so many of the parents feel, even at an elementary school level. We have Saturday Parent University, and it's not just for parenting, it's for the academics. I remember my mother used to talk about the new math.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
No, it was fifth grade math for me.
It was-
I
it was-
tapped out then.
I tapped out. And so we're really doing a lot to work with our parents, because as you have younger parents, if you have parents who are working 2 jobs just to make ends meet, they don't have the time, the energy, and some of them don't have the skill base themselves to really help their children keep up. And so when you got down to it, I said it wasn't about basketball and it wasn't about swimming. It was about the fact that they didn't have the time to help their children with homework, and oftentimes they didn't have the skill. And so we're doing, you know, evening school for the parents, Saturday schools, Parent University, to just really help our parents with their confidence in becoming engaged in their children's education so that they don't tap out.
That's important.
I'll just close with this. I think one of the things that we're missing right now as a country is a fundamental commitment to invest in early childhood education.
That's right.
When Congress passed the child care tax credit during the pandemic, it literally wiped out child poverty in the country. We need to make the child care tax credit permanent, and the federal government should give America's mayors more resources to invest in high-quality child care, because that's how you get the right head start to succeed in life.
That's it. Thank you. And now we know why Black mayors matter. Thank the panel.
Thank you all.
Please.
Mayors, can you stand right there in front for your photo, Mayor? All righty, as the stage team is flipping the stage real quick, they're gonna add a couple of chairs. If they could come out real quick so that we can get ready for panel 2. Great conversation. That's what happens when you put 3 attorneys and a Delta on a panel together. Alrighty, let's get this conversation going. On this panel, moderating will be Mayor Victoria Woodard from the great city of Tacoma, Washington. Mayor Corey Woods from the city of Tempe, Arizona. Mayor Deanna Holiday Ingram from East Point, Georgia. And Amber Reynolds from Board of Governors, U.S. Postal Service. And last but not least, from the great city of Chicago, Mayor Brandon Johnson. Mayor Johnson, of course, has to leave a little bit early, so if he exits the stage, you'll know that I told you so. So thank you. Mayor Woodard, you want to get the conversation started?
Can't wait. I had a whole page of notes I wanted to do for introductory remarks, but after hearing that last panel and knowing we got 4 elected officials on this panel, I'm not going to say nothing and dive in and ask the questions. because this is going to be a good conversation. So I just want to start with a lightning round question. So, yep, 30 seconds a minute. But my question is, as we get this panel started, what's at stake when we are not civically engaged?
I guess what I'll say is that our interests are not going to be represented if we are not having conversations, if we are not actively voting. It's like they always talk about, if you are actually not at the table, you are on the menu. And that is just the reality of it. As black mayors and as black people in this room, we have to make sure that we are part of these important conversations if we want to make sure that our interests are going to be represented.
Yeah, I echo that. I think it's easier. I look at it from a resident perspective and a mayor's perspective. So if mayors are not civically engaged, meaning interacting with their constituency, it's easier to have people who are engaging who don't know how government works. And when people don't know how government works, there's this tension because people think things should be done a certain way without that understanding. So I do mobile mayor where I'll do a pop-up and just put out a table with a little tablecloth on that says mobile mayor in the community on a corner to meet people where they are, to educate them. Also, community conversations. I will go over the organizational structure of the city so that people understand what departments are responsible for what, to have the 50,000 square foot view, and then also let them know where to find the charter. Because people will tell them one thing, but they need to be able to access it themselves. And it's easier for us to make decisions without resident voice if we are not going to our residents and encouraging them to be engaged. And then from a resident perspective, if residents aren't engaged and aren't involved, it's easier to make decisions about them without them. I'm about to date myself. How many people remember FUBU? For us, by us, right? I had some shoes and a sweatsuit. But it's easier to do that, and so we really encourage them to be engaged. And it's also easier to come up with solutions that don't address root cause issues when you're not hearing from the community and what they need.
First of all, I'm Vernon Jones. I'm from here in Georgia, former two-term legislator, maybe 12 years in the Georgia House of Representatives, I think 12, I forget, and I did 2 tours, but also former county executive of DeKalb County, Georgia. Know a little bit about government and public policy from a legislator and to have run a government as a chief executive. I want to be very clear and very simple. If you don't get engaged, you will be disengaged. If you don't get engaged, you'll be disengaged, and people have more expectation of others than they have themselves. You want us to do this for you and that for you, but what do you do? Your involvement is what really matters. So public engagement, politicians can put it out there and put it all over the place, but if you're not willing to go and get involved and get engaged, you will be disengaged. And next thing you know, you wake up and saying, they did this to me. No, they didn't do this to me. You did this to you. So public engagement on both sides is important.
Amber? Well, I'm Amber McReynolds, and I work on democracy and voting issues nationwide. I'm the former director of elections in Denver, so had the pleasure of working with Mayor Hancock from Denver. So we have a civic health and engagement crisis, and I can actually demonstrate that just simply looking at turnout numbers. The top 10 states for turnout are the same every election cycle. Washington and Colorado are part of that. We talked about that before this panel. The bottom 10 states for turnout are always the same, and it's directly related to what the policies and voting access laws are in each state. And when I think about turnout in 2020, 66% of eligible voters in the country voted in the highest turnout election we had ever seen. That means 80 million people did not vote. 1 in 3 eligible Americans did not vote in 2020, the highest turnout on record. That, to me, is the crisis that our communities face, that we face from an engagement perspective, from a government trust perspective. If you are not engaged, voting is just one aspect of that, but if you are not engaged, you are disengaged, but you also are in a spiral of disengagement beyond just that one election cycle. And just to put those numbers even in a more direct picture for you, the top vote getter in the presidential election in 2020 got 81 million votes. The second place person got 74 million. 80 million would have been second place. That's the did not vote category. And when asked, 40% of those voters that did not vote missed a deadline, couldn't get off work to vote, had challenges with just getting access. So when I say we have a civic health and engagement crisis, we do, but we also know solutions that work.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Legacy is at stake when we're not engaged. You know, I'm thinking about the book Up From Slavery. Booker T. Washington had some of the most profound words in that book, but there was a question asked, the difference between a black boy and a white boy, and Booker T. Washington made it very clear. The difference is that a white boy knows his legacy. So he's accountable to his father, his grandfather, and his grandfather's father, where a black boy, that legacy gets cut off. And so when we're not engaged, it begets more disengagement that has already been spoken of. And that anything that's going to transform in this country, any experiment that is worthwhile invested in, it doesn't happen without black participation. And so when we don't participate, this country falls. And obviously you're seeing some of the manifestation of that. But it's a legacy that's really at stake right now.
So Mayor Johnson, we'll stay with you for just a moment. So as you talk about that legacy, and I can just tell just from how you're sharing it, how important that is to you, what are you all doing in Chicago, and what policies have you put in place to make sure that voting is accessible to everyone in your community?
Well, thank you for that question. We have to make it easier. One of the things that I do appreciate is that in this moment, you do have a very provoked electorate, particularly a younger electorate. So I won by 26,532 votes roughly. 27,000 new voters voted in the second round that did not vote in the first round. They were all under the age of 34. So young people are essentially responsible for a 48-year-old man getting elected. And so the reason why I believe that that engagement that has been a part of at least the work that I've done as an organizer is critical, just simply because the more we are responding and reacting to the demands that this particular generation has, that increases not just participation, but confidence in their participation. And so in the city of Chicago, we have same-day registration. We're opened up as much as we possibly can with early voting, voting by mail. We also have something called automatic voter registration. So if a resident has an interaction with a state agency, whether it's DMV or whatever, once that information pops up, those other state agencies will be able to notice if that person is registered. And then because they already have their information, it just makes the process easier for them to take the next step. But the bottom line is we have to make sure that we're responding to the needs and the demands that entices them to want to engage, and then we need to make it as accessible as possible. Voting on election day, if you're not registered, you can show up that day, get registered, and vote.
Thank you. Amber, we're going to move to you as we talk about accessibility, and you were recently, as you already said, the director of Denver's elections. So talk a little bit about the innovative techniques that you use to boost voter turnout.
Well, first, in my tenure, I've run elections for over 20 years now, and when I was in Denver, I had an incredible mayor, Mayor Hancock, who wanted to support our office. We were independent of the mayor's office, but he made a direct commitment to support the voting infrastructure of the city and county of Denver. So first, had an incredible partner as mayor, even though, you know, we weren't part of the mayor's executive offices, we were independent of that, he still committed significant resources within the city. So I'm an example, Denver's an example of the power that mayors can have in supporting the infrastructure that is voting in a city. And voting and the election administration process is critical infrastructure. It's no different than taking care of roads and bridges and water and all of the other necessities within a city. It is critical infrastructure. We don't fund it as if it's critical infrastructure, but it needs to be. And mayors and cities have tremendous connectivity and power with their constituents to educate, create programs that better engage citizenry. Just a couple of examples that we did in Denver. I worked with the mayor and his safety department to create a voting program for people that were incarcerated, so serving time but eligible, whether that be they were awaiting trial or they were serving non-felony convictions. First in the state of Colorado, one of the first in the country to do that. We created that pilot program. It's now become state law and it's permanent. We also introduced a program to pilot hiring citizens that were experiencing homelessness to be election judges. They came in and they worked as poll workers. They got dignity of jobs through the city, and they became engaged. And the number of letters that we received when that happened from those people that had an opportunity to engage in their city and start to rebuild their lives were significant. We also created things like ballot tracking and some other innovative technology, and we did a lot with digital and social media. We had an incredible communications team. One of the guys is here today, Alton, in the room, but they worked to figure out new ways of reaching young voters and voters that were disengaged. So we did all those things, and it was in partnership with our mayor. And I think it's so important for mayors to lead on creating civic culture, putting voters first, prioritizing meeting voters where they are, even in states where voting has become challenging because of the policies.
Thank you. So, Vernon, you know, you just heard most cities don't have the responsibility for this critical infrastructure as it relates to voting. And so, having heard that, we know that counties play an essential role in ensuring voting access. But in light of what's happening across this country, what is your advice to other elected county officials on dealing with these issues?
And what is happening across the country when you say in light of what's happening across the country?
Well, when we look at voter suppression across the country, when we look at all the issues that are built around the inability to be, or the lack of access to be able to vote, that's what I'm talking about around the country.
As county executive, I oversaw elections. And one of the things I made sure, not only did I fund our elections office, but I made sure that we had adequate equipment, that equipment was tested and retested. I made sure we had adequately trained poll workers. I also made sure that if that precinct was too crowded, too many people there, that we would split up. So the infrastructure was to make sure it operated in the most efficient and most effective way. It's a management issue. A lot of these issues we're having around so-called suppression. There is some suppression, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but some of the suppression is self-inflicted. For example, I remember hearing Patrick Leahy from Vermont, Senator Leahy from Vermont, on a hearing during Amy Barrett's, her confirmation for Supreme Court Justice. And he held up a picture. He was talking about voter suppression in Georgia. He specifically said, yes, down in DeKalb County, Georgia. Well, first of all, I knew he didn't know a damn thing about Georgia because it's not pronounced as DeKalb, it's DeKalb. First thing. Secondly, he held up a picture of black people in a long line. So these long lines down in DeKalb County, Georgia. Well, as the chief executive, when I was there, we didn't have those long lines because of being my responsibility as the manager of the county to make sure those elections were efficient and effective. Now, he said it was discrimination, that they're doing this to black people. Now, help me with this. The majority governing authority of DeKalb County is black. The chief executive of DeKalb County is black. The election supervisor is black. The majority of the election board members are black. The majority of the workers at the polls are black. So if blacks were being suppressed from voting, who's doing it? See, it's a management issue, but it gets out in a whole new different manner that there is voter suppression in Georgia. You heard about how, Senate Bill 202 in Georgia, the so-called Jim Crow bill that said that black people weren't given water and black people couldn't go and vote and stand in line, all this stuff. So let's talk about that briefly. In Georgia, you cannot come within 150 feet of the polling interest campaigning with campaign paraphernalia. And at the same time, Senate Bill 202 addressed, yes, you can bring water. People can have water standing in line, but many times you have to be careful. People are campaigning, and zealous people are campaigning. They come in and they're passing out literature. So what the law said was that, again, you can't pass out water whoever's putting it on, they can give out water. You can be 150 feet and 1 inch, and somebody can bring you some water. But the misperception was that in Georgia, you couldn't give out water, you couldn't give out food. And that was wrong. And we lost the All-Star game, Major League Baseball coming to Georgia in a almost 70% black area, where all these black businesses had gotten their equipment to sell and make money during the Olympics, black businesses, and it left and went to Denver, Colorado. No disrespect to you, but the black population in Denver, Colorado is about 9% African American. And by the way, state of New York's elections are much more restrictive than Georgia's, but Major League Baseball has its headquarters in New York. So when you start to break this thing down and look at it, a lot of this perception, now there is some voter suppression. Not saying there's not. But let's look at what real voter suppression is when we say that. Let's look at what it really is. And I'll give you an example of voter suppression right here in Georgia. The courts just ruled recently that Georgia had to draw some more districts that were predominantly black. There were several of them that were drawn where 3 white females, very liberal white females, were drawn from majority white districts to majority black districts. One of those white females that was drawn from her district originally was 70% black, 7% white, 30% black. It flipped where she was in a 7% black and 30% black, 7% black and 30% white district. A black female, the first black female state senator elected to Georgia, ran in this seat or went to qualify. She was accosted at qualifying by 2 white Democrat senators trying to keep her from qualifying. Then 3 days later, after she qualified, they filed a suit to try to have her thrown off the ballot. Now, this is a court-ordered 70% black district. A black female is trying to run, and a white female is trying to keep her from running, including trying to take her off the ballot. Luckily, the judge ruled in her favor. Now, the NAACP knew about it. They didn't say anything. The Georgia Democratic Party knew about it. They didn't say anything. The news media kept it quiet because they didn't want the blacks to know that these seats are heavily black, so blacks wouldn't even run for the seat. And so there are some voter suppression. There are some. But let's keep it in perspective. Let's try to keep it in perspective. The Voters' Right Act, which is important, is very important. But here's what's happening, too, in terms of suppression. Literally, where you have communities where majority blacks are now, let's say, running the county, you're seeing where they're going and creating white cities. They're literally bleaching government, creating white cities, where you go from an area where it's 80 to 90% black till they find these white pockets and they create cities. That in itself is some voter suppression, because when you vote for those new cities, only the folks in those cities, the new city lines, can even vote. So there's a lot of suppression, but it's hidden in different ways. And I just like to highlight some of this in case somebody didn't know. Some of you may know about this, but I think it's important as we talk. And I know it's a little long-winded, but this is so important. And you talk about engagement, it's less than 100 people here. So just look around, less than 100 people. That's engagement.
All right now. Dina.
So, yeah.
I got a different question for you. I got a different question for you. We know that Georgia really has become a battleground state, obviously based on the last major election. So let me ask you this. What do you think was the key role that mayors played in turning out the vote?
So as a Georgia mayor of a city right down the street, East Point, where there's no point like East Point, I think there's always 2 sides to every story. And I encourage you all to read Senate Bill 202 because when you talk about voter suppression, it's making it harder to register, we're making it harder to cast your vote, and making it harder for your vote to be counted. So when in 2020, where there was a high voter turnout, Georgia kind of went purple, they say. We delivered in a number of different ways. That was also historic high voter turnout. So as mayors, we know there are times when we do pilots. You test something out to see if it worked. But we had COVID. We had to pilot a lot of different things because people couldn't get to the polls, for safety reasons and all that. So there were some things that were put in place to make it registering easier, your ability to access the polls and vote easier, and to have your vote counted. And it worked. Usually what happens after pilots, if they're successful, what do? You scale up. Well, Senate Bill 202 came after that, to me, which is scaling down. I think when you say people cannot provide water and food to people who are in line, that is basically criminalizing morality. And people who were making these decisions were Christians. And so the Bible that I read says, when I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was hungry, you fed me. And so when you start getting those things, and you start legislating morality, it is a very slippery slope and it's never worked well for black people. So what did we do as mayors? And I think what was important is, you know, we talk about Mayor of Chicago, Mayor Johnson indicated people were working. Or I think it might have been Amber who talked about people not being able to vote because they were working. Well, when America realized, or the federal government realized that we should probably not have a holiday for somebody who didn't discover land where people already were living, and gave us an extra holiday to use, so no longer was Columbus Day a federal holiday, we made Election Day a holiday. Because as city leaders, we have the ability to influence by how we lead. So if we say it's important for our people who work for our city to vote, and we make it a holiday, we can also influence businesses within our community to do the same thing so that people are able to go cast their votes. We also, as a city, we own our own power and water. We have our own utilities. So we send out utility bills, right? It's also important that people knew about all those changes in Senate Bill 202 and beyond. And so we ensure that when we send out our utility bills, we include voter information, not partisan, nonpartisan, but we have to educate our people. As black people, we're used to the rules being changed on us to keep us down. But what have our ancestors shown us? You know the rules, you figure them out, you build an underground railroad, and you still get the freedom, right? So that's what we've been doing as mayors, and I think it's critically important to not miss that. Let's not be confused. In Georgia, there's state legislation laws. In Fulton County, where East Point is, the county actually operates our elections, but there's still things that we can do, which was making voting Election Day a holiday, as well as making sure that we're educating our voters on how to register, how to cast their vote, and ensure that their vote is counting, because that is voter suppression, and those are things that we can do.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayors, I took some notes to take some of that home. Mayor Woods, you are the mayor of a college town, Arizona State, and here we sit on a college campus, Morehouse. What best practices can you share about how you engage college students in the voting process?
So one of the first things I think about is, so Tempe is home to Arizona State University, which is the largest public university in the country. There are approximately 60,000 students on the Tempe campus alone, and ASU has about 100,000 students across all of their campuses throughout the state of Arizona. So it is a huge, huge university, and every year, Dr. Crow, who's our president, says that they're welcoming their biggest incoming freshman class. So it just continues to get bigger with each passing year. One of the first things we do, though, is we try to engage students even before they get to college. I actually have a Mayor's Youth Advisory Commission at the City of Tempe getting high school students involved in civic engagement and in student government. So it's trying to even educate students who are 14, 15, 16, 17 years old about why this is so critically important to their future. But once they actually get to the university, the biggest thing I try to do, and I could talk about the programs we have, like College Connect and a couple of other initiatives we have through the mayor's office and through the city, but the biggest thing I try to do is actually go to campus and talk to students directly. For a lot of the students who have a chance to see me, they'll look at me and go, well, that guy looks like he could be my older brother. Obviously, I have an opportunity to get into politics if he can actually run the city of Tempe. Yet I tell them I'll be 46 this year, so I'm not as young as I look, but to a lot of them, I look very young still. But I really spend a lot of time directly on campuses, whether it's going to the ASU Young Democrats. I've even gone to the College Republicans a couple of times and talked to them when they've requested I come out. I say, hey, the mayor of the city of Tempe is a nonpartisan office, and I'm happy to frankly talk to any young person in a college or university environment who's trying to learn more about civic participation and how they can get more involved in their local government. But I think that's the biggest key. we can create all the programs we want, and I'm not saying those programs aren't important or that they're not successful, but I think it really is critically important for a lot of these young people to hear from us directly, so we're inspiring that next generation of youth to get involved.
Thank you, Mayor Woods. You know, that really lines up with our next question. And Mayor Johnson, I'm going to come back to you because I know you've got to leave us in a few minutes. So we just heard from Mayor Woods about what we can do to continue to inspire young people. We just had Nicole Hannah-Jones from the 1619 Project in Tacoma a couple of weeks ago. And someone stood up and asked her, well, what do we say to these young people? You might be one of the few mayors that I know. Well, you are one of the few mayors that I know who can say that you had young people turn out and they got you elected. Because in most cities, we're struggling to get our young people to vote. But that question was asked of Nicole Hannah-Jones, and she said, well, first of all, we have to recognize the apathy that they have and why they have it. Because even when we do vote, sometimes it doesn't always seem to work out best for us. And so as a person who's been elected by young people, what is your advice, as we sit here on this campus, what do you say to those young people who have that apathy and don't feel like the system works for them?
Well, thank you for that question. Look, I'm not going to act like I have figured out young people. I have a 16-year-old in my home right now that, he mumbles like 3 words a week to me, so probably could use some home parenting advice. But one of the things that I think is important for us to do as leaders, as adults, we have to be a little bit more vulnerable with our young people and remind ourselves that, and let them know that we should stop acting like we weren't young once upon a time. Mm-hmm. And, I think about just my trajectory, from being raised in a fundamental, major denomination in this country, being raised in the churches of God in Christ. If my grandfather knew that his grandson was promoting the legalization of marijuana and gambling for revenue, oh my God, I wouldn't even be allowed in his pulpit. It's for a good cause, Grandpa. May you rest in peace. And so just having that understanding and connection. I think the second thing is I appreciate, mayors engaging young people. We have a youth commission. It's 40 people that we just expanded, and I pay them. The reason why I'm highlighting that, and this is my last point, this generation is unique. So I'm Generation X as well, which means we are the last obedient generation on the planet. You talk to a young person, they're eager to start their career, and they start their job on Monday. They want a paycheck on Friday, and then they need a mental health day the following Monday. Hello. Versus my father, who retired with like 400 sick days, and he was proud of it. It's just understanding that there's a cultural shift here, and that it's incumbent upon us to not do what the generation that raised Generation X, where you just simply, you dog it and you tell them to suck it up and grow up. The reason why I'm highlighting that is because the best way in which we can help engage and keep young people active is to not just challenge them to think outside of their own experiences, but to validate their vulnerabilities. Our young people are struggling, you all. The quick little anecdote here, right towards the end of the pandemic, my daughter, she's 9 now, at the time she was 7, and we're having this back and forth. I mean, we had been in the house together for a year and a half. So first of all, I'm arguing with a little black girl, which means I failed as a black parent, right? So we're going back and forth. And then she stops the conversation and she says, Dad, you are triggering me. That's not funny, y'all. That's not. Even white parents like, you went too far, little girl. Her uncle that she never met, my older brother, he died addicted and unhoused. I wonder if he would have had the courage of my daughter to say that he was in pain if he would be alive today. The young people that we're trying to engage, they're not sucking it up. They're not just gonna just hide their pain somewhere in a room. They're gonna let you know exactly how they feel and what they want. It's important that we pay attention to it, even if it's a little misguided or it's not as fully matured. I taught middle school, I taught high school. Those dynamics are real. So what we are attempting to do as an administration is to center our work around young people, youth employment, summer jobs, year-round positions, making sure that they have agency. I'm visiting high schools, just having roundtable discussions with high school students, particularly those schools that don't get attention. Same thing, working to engage college campuses. But our young people need to feel us and experience us. And I think it's important that we do that. I'm learning how to accept not just the responsibility, but the opportunity in this moment to make sure that the 58th mayor of the city of Chicago, 23 years from now, is fully prepared to lead, but really to lead in all of the different dimensions that their talents bring. So see young people, hear them, feel them, empower them by making sure that we're actually expressing what their aspirations are. So thank you all.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'm just going to help you. Your team is, they're circling. They ain't messing around. You got to go.
That's why I kept talking. I want to stay longer, but I got to go.
Yeah, look, if they were going to come up on stage and take you out, so I suggest you put your mic down. And go ahead, drop the mic. And thank you so much, Mayor Johnson, for joining us today. All right, Amber, we're going to turn to you after talking about young people. And so give us some ideas, as you've done this work around the country. Give us some ideas about how different institutions, not just government, but even how government can sometimes engage different institutions and get them to help us increase our voter turnout.
Yeah, well, and here's a couple. I want to give some very tangible, actionable steps for engagement on a couple of fronts. So the Department of Education actually just clarified the federal work-study program. We just talked about the amazing Arizona State in Tempe. So the federal work-study program is actually something that universities leverage, and there's federal funds available for that for college students to work. They clarified that students can work in election offices as part of that. So that's a significant move just from the federal perspective that creates partnership between universities and election offices and also cities. So that's a big one that I wanted to highlight. It hasn't made the rounds all over, but I think it's significant. The other one is a project that we worked on extensively in Denver, and I wasn't able to get it all completely done, but I think this is another example of something that mayors could really lead on. Most states allow election judges or poll workers to be 15, 16, 17, so you can work in an election office. If cities, and I've brought this up, maybe we should be requiring high school students to work a certain number of hours in an election office during an election serving their community. They're going to be much better prepared to be a voter when they turn 18 and become eligible if they have been working in a civic-based environment while earning money to do it. So I think that's a huge opportunity. I think mayors could really lead on that. I look at it as a workforce kind of, environment, but also a civics education piece for kids. The other thing, as mentioned, civics education is absolutely critical. It has to start in the lower second grade, first grade. Can't wait till kids get in high school and start trying to convince them that this is important. I would encourage all parents. I have an 11 and 13-year-old. They have been helping me with my ballot since they could start reading. We sit down, it takes me about 3 or 4 days, thank goodness for voting by mail in Colorado, but it takes me a while, and they say things like, "Mommy, what does a mayor do? What does the school board president do? What are you voting on here? What does this ballot initiative mean?" That is the most direct and obvious civic education for young people if we encourage parents to bring their kids into the voting process in that way. And then this infrastructure, finally this big infrastructure that is the voting infrastructure. I was lucky to have an incredible mayor that allocated city resources, whether it was on the emergency management front on election day or on the communications front, where he would tell all of the city agencies, PIOs, you're dedicated to elections for the next 3 days. You're going to help people understand this process. You're going to help on the communications front. And so that's a really obvious way that I think all of those are good examples of ways that mayors could really lead, and also good examples of opportunities that exist for funding and other supportive mechanisms.
Thank you. All right, Commissioner Jones.
I'm not a commissioner.
You're not, oh, it says you're not,
There's a big difference between a commissioner
and a county executive. I do know that. I do know. I looked down at my paper.
I don't want to disrespect commissioners.
No, right, no. That's like a mayor saying we don't want to disrespect a council member. I get it. Question for you. As we've just talked about low voter turnout, we talked about suppression and heard you clearly on suppression around management, but as we think about low voter turnout in that, what advice would you give to us, having been over an election system, what advice would you give to us to increase our voter turnout?
Let me
Move your mic.
to the gentle lady here. She mentioned earlier about Senate Bill 202. Sorry. How many people here have a photo ID? Or no, maybe I should say, who do not have a photo ID? Raise your hand. You do not. You do not have a photo ID. Where do you live? Oh, so who in here do not have a photo ID? Okay, I've been in this business for about 35 years. I've never met a person who said they didn't have a photo ID, therefore they couldn't vote. Senate Bill 202 merely said, as one of the provisions, that if you go and mail in your ballot, send in a copy of your photo ID. In Georgia, to get a photo ID is free. It's free to go to Department of Motor Vehicle and get a photo ID. It's free. A photo ID is free. And for black people to have been sold a bill of goods that if you don't, that you can't afford a free photo ID, therefore you're suppressed. See, this is, I'm just trying to get, this is information education. This is factual. So black people do have photo IDs. We aren't that stupid that we can't afford a free photo ID. And so I want to clarify that. Now, the other thing is, you can put a voting precinct in the bed with people, and a lot of them still not going to vote. Lay it up beside them, give them all the instructions. But if you tell that young person you can't get on TikTok unless you go and vote, you have a record turnout. If a white cop killed a black man the day before elections, the polls would be just lines out the wazoo. We're reactionary people. Now, some of you may not want to hear that, but you're going to think about this later on. It really makes sense. I'm just the messenger. Voter registration and voter participation is two different things. So I implore you, like I said, look, we look here, as important as this is, as important as this issue is, look at how many people here. But if this was a Beyonce concert, if some rappers, entertainers were here, if it was the all-star basketball game, it'd be packed. So we have to live with the reality that people do not go and vote as often as they should. And they don't understand it. So young people, my mom and dad was third grade educated. They could not go and vote. And when they got the right to vote, and I'm hearing them talking about it, they talked about and preached about it day in and day out. Parents make a big difference because you're training them at an early age to vote. You're training them at an early age. You're catching them early. They know about sneakers. They know how to use a cell phone. They know all these other things. So where's the parents in this? If the parents don't go and vote, kids are not going to go and vote because they don't see it. You got to make it a part of the culture. It has to be a part of the culture. Now, I may not be saying some things that somebody, you may not like what I'm saying, but by the way, though, too, I am proud of Georgia because when that bill did pass, Senate Bill 202, more blacks voted after that bill was passed in Georgia than in Georgia's history. So we can rise to the occasion when we want to. We can put these barriers here and cry victim all we want to, but until we look in the mirror, it starts with the person in the mirror.
All right, thank you, Mr. Executive. I'm going to now move on to Corey Woods and Mayor Ingram. I'm going to let you have the last word. We're talking about young people, and young people will live in all kinds of situations. And I hear you about sometimes we do it to ourselves, but there's also, in a lot of cases, people are dealing with a lot of other things, and voting's not the first thing on their mind. So there are a large swath of, especially for not necessarily college students, but there are a large swath of people who live in our communities who are unhoused. And in order to be able to vote, you got to have an address. So talk to us a little bit about how you promote engagement with those who are unhoused and how you provide an opportunity for them to be able to vote.
So very quickly on this, on our voter registration forms, even if you don't have the ability to provide an exact physical address, there is a space on an Arizona voter registration form where you actually have a small map and you can draw the sort of approximate location where you are, which will enable you to vote, which is one of the more progressive things, frankly. I know people read a lot about Arizona and some of the challenges we have sometimes, but that is one of the things that we do very well. And I also say we're one of the states that has done early voting for well over 20 years and frankly does it exceptionally well from my perspective. Ballots go out about 4 weeks before any election, so it gives people an adequate amount of time to get a ballot in the mail, do their research on the candidates, go to candidate forums, go to their websites, read position papers, and then it gives them an opportunity to vote after they've had a chance to sort of educate themselves on the candidates. And so you don't have the situation of, well, if you have a problem on election day and you don't have the ability to get to a poll, there are multiple opportunities in the state to allow that. But I will say that is one of the things with the unhoused, that you actually can draw a picture or a circle in approximate place on the map that is provided on that form to show people, to show elections where you live, to allow yourself to vote. But the bigger thing that we have to obviously worry about is trying to find ways to help our unhoused population even more than we do. We have a homeless outreach team that's called our Hope Team in the city of Tempe. We have navigators that work directly with the city of Tempe, and we have partnerships with our faith community and our nonprofits and even a lot of our folks in the private sector that really is trying to not only help folks vote, but get them reconnected to shelter or services or reconnected to their families. And so there are methods, stopgap methods, to allow someone who's unhoused to vote in the upcoming election. But the biggest thing we need to worry about is trying to find ways to really help lift those folks up. And that's what we're committed to doing.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor Woods. Okay, Mayor Ingram, final question to you. We've had all this conversation today about voting rights and civic engagement. But if we just took a minute and we thought about former Congressman John Lewis, and as he sits in heaven and he looks down on what's happening in this world today, what do you think he would say?
So I think he would remind us of what Zora Neale Hurston said, all my skin folk ain't my kinfolk. I think that's what he'd tell me today. I think he would also continue to tell us that we should get in good trouble, necessary trouble. I think he would ask those of us who are sitting here today, how many of you have a photocopy machine at your house, a copier? Something to make a copy in print, a printer. Raise your hand, how many? So that's not everybody. How many people have a car? Like you're here for the African American Marriage Association conference. But when you get home, you got a car, right? So either you got a copier in your house or you actually have a car to drive to FedEx, Kinko's, or wherever else you need to go make a copy of your photo ID to be able to put it in the mail with your ballot, right? But think about the many people who live in our communities who don't have either. Who don't have either. So when you talk about legislation, we try to normalize those things that don't work for people who look like us. Not us. We're part of the W.E.B. Du Bois Talented 10th. W.E.B. Du Bois said the Negro race, like all other races, will be saved by its exceptional men, and I add women, right? Ain't nobody coming to save us. We got to save ourselves. But it's not just about these people sitting in the seat. It's about the people in the community that elect us to serve all of them and to make sure that they have access, to make sure that they have ability to have a voice, to make sure that they can participate in this democracy. And so the fight, John Lewis would tell us, around good trouble, necessary trouble, as it comes to voting, is to ensure that everybody, that we level the playing field for everybody, and that we don't create new barriers that prevent or make it harder for people to register to vote, to access the ballot and cast their vote, and for their votes to be counted. He would also tell us to partner with organizations like New Georgia Project, Fair Fight, Georgia Stand Up. If you all went on the tour yesterday, the Georgia Stand Up, the Movement Center, like those organizations who help us organize, educate, and teach people about these new laws, and then create opportunities to help them get photo IDs, copies of their photo ID to mail it in. So in the spirit of the person who we all stand on his shoulders, and we all remember the image of him from Bloody Sunday, I encourage you today to not just think about yourself and what you can do because of the opportunities that you've been afforded or the people that have helped you, because somebody always helps somebody. You ain't do this by yourself. I don't care who you are. I would encourage you, and he would say, to remember that that is our duty and our obligations as Black electeds in this country, to be the voice for those who are voiceless, and to always think about the least, the lost, and the left out. Because if we're sitting at these tables and we're not making people think about all people, we just like them. I'll end with, all my kinfolk, all my skinfolk ain't my kinfolk. Thank you so much.
And the final word is amen.
Thank you. Thank you. Panel, can you stand up so the photog can get your photos for those who want to take photos of you? It's been a great evening, afternoon, morning, and I want to give Mayor Stephen Reed, the president of the African American Mayors Association, a moment to do some closing remarks, and then we'll have some housekeeping rules for Tyler Perry Studios.
Let's give our panelists another round of applause. I would, again, want to thank each and every one of you for coming out to have a conversation around civic engagement and voting rights. I want to thank former Denver Mayor Michael Hancock for helping assist in this endeavor. Certainly I want to thank Phyllis Dickerson, the rest of the AMA staff for helping put this on, and we want to thank all of you that came out. You know, I'm going to take a point of personal privilege to say that before I was mayor, I was chief election official for 7 years. I was the first Black elected chief election official in Montgomery County's history. So I know a little bit about elections. So, you know, there's something said that on this stage that I would say just take that with a grain of salt, and I'll leave that there. I think we know what the real situation is. I think we know what the real challenges are, and I think we know who's presenting those challenges intentionally. Congressman John Lewis didn't call voter IDs a 21st century poll tax in 2011 just for nothing. So I think we need to consider who the messenger is. I'll just say that. That being said, thank all of you again for your leadership. Thank you for what you do at cities, to President Thomas, to Dean Carter. Thank you all for your leadership here at Morehouse College, and my good friend Henry Goodgame. Thank you for your leadership and your support and what you continue to do for this college. And we stand committed to partner with you and all of our HBCUs each and every way that we can. And I look forward to what AMA will be doing moving forward in the days and weeks and months to come, and I look forward to your support and your engagement in making sure that we make a difference, not only in this conversation on this topic, but many, many others that impact our communities. Thank you so much.
So for those of you who are joining us live stream, thank you for joining us at ALMA Conference 2024. We